Attention Delaware small business owners. If you're looking to grow in 2025, I encourage you to check out the Delaware Division of Small Business Edge Grant Competition. STEM companies can earn up to $100,000 and entrepreneur class companies up to $50,000. Applicants must employ 10 or fewer individuals, be majority located right here in Delaware, and have been in operation less than 7 years.
For more information, visit de.gov/edge.
Facts matter. History matters. And yet in today's culture wars, even reality feels like it's up for debate. And tonight, we're diving into a conversation that shouldn't be controversial, but here we are. Our guest, Charlie Copeland, former Delaware GOP chair and conservative commentator, and believe it or not, friend of the show. At the center of it all, Caesar Rodney, Delaware's Midnight Rider, a man who enslaved 200 people. His statue was removed in 2020. Should it return? Should it even have been there at all? And what does this debate say about how we remember his history? Charlie Copeland is here. Let's get into it. This is The Agenda. Welcome back. Welcome to The Agenda. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you, Charlie Copeland, for joining us again right here on The Agenda.
Thank you, Kerwin. I always enjoy coming back.
You're still accepting my calls.
Indeed, I am.
It's always a good sign.
When only 3 people call me, it's really hard to,
Well, at least I made the 3.
That's
at least
right.
I made the 3. I don't know if it's taboo to say Happy New Year in February, but Happy New Year. I haven't seen you since then.
Yeah, no, I think it's always appropriate to say Happy New Year, especially in February.
Well, we agree, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen. That might be the only time tonight. We're talking tonight, amongst other things. We're going to get into a lot. We're going to get into a lot in the amount of time that we have. We'll just kind of ease into this. But we want to start off with Caesar Rodney. Now, you work for the Caesar Rodney Institute.
Correct.
The Caesar Rodney statue was removed from Rodney Square in 2020.
Yep.
I think 2020.
Yeah.
And it was removed at the height of, I guess, the problems that the country was having after the George Floyd murder.
Sure.
The country was hurting, especially racially. People wanted things done. And one of the things that they did was the removal of the Caesar Rodney statue.
Sure.
And your thoughts on that? I'll start there.
Yeah, so I think it was mistaken. I don't think the emotions were wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the George Floyd murder was horrific.
Murder. It was
right.
murder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It was murder.
That's what I said. And so I think that having those raw emotions, there's nothing wrong with that. But at some point, you do have to come back and say, let's go back and talk about this, and let's make sure that we get the history right around Caesar Rodney and around America. And so I have no problem with at the moment of crisis, various folks saying, let's pull the statue aside. And at that point in time, the mayor, Mike Perzicki, said, we'll have a conversation about it later. Let's let and then of course he scampered out of office before we had that conversation. And so I think it's important that somebody say, hey, we should have that conversation, especially because every one of us as individuals, as states, as a country, as a globe, have things that we didn't do very well. And maybe we should talk about that and be honest about it, but also talk about the things that we did do well and recognize those, because it's the things that we did well and the things we did as a result of the things we did poorly that got us to where we are today, which is the greatest country in the history of the world.
So there's no way, Charlie, 200 slaves.
Okay, let's think about this, right? So Caesar Rodney is born in Kent County in the early 1700s. Let me ask you or any of your viewers, can you name one place in the globe prior to 1760 that talked about freeing slaves and not having slavery anywhere in the globe? Prior to 1750, anywhere in the globe.
Prior to 1750,
yeah.
I think the only...
Exactly, nobody can. Now, you could actually look at the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church did issue some things to the Spanish around natives in what were the Americas, but not black importation of slaves. They talked about not having slaves of the natives, if you will, in the Spanish conquested areas. But in the early 1700s, the Quakers were the first people to start to say, you know, this is wrong, flat out. William Penn was a Quaker. And so this area had a lot of Quakers, which is why you've got Tubman Garrett Park, because Garrett was a Quaker. And John Hunn, who was the founder of the Underground Railroad through Kent County, was a Quaker, lived in Kent County. The Hunns knew the Rodneys. The Rodneys were not Quakers. The Hunns were Quakers. So Caesar Rodney's born, and he's born to a landowning family, not a particularly large landowning family, but a landowning family. And they owned slaves, because every landowning family owned slaves. It was the norm.
But it was already in conversation.
It was not.
It was too in conversation.
Before 1750. Tell me where.
Before 1750.
Tell me where.
There has always been an ethical dilemma.
Give me where. Tell me what people were talking about this
to slavery. I don't.
Because you can't find it.
I don't have the conversation.
Now, once the Quakers came along and started the conversation, the states in this area and in the north, where you didn't have the large plantations you did in the south, and you had a shorter growing season, we're looking at it saying there is something inherently wrong about this. Benjamin Franklin was one of those people. And so in 1767, Caesar Rodney, who at that point in time was in the General Assembly, I'm sorry, 1769, he was the Speaker of the General Assembly in the state of Delaware, and he introduced a bill banning the importation of slavery. The bill didn't pass. He introduced that bill as a Kent County landowner that had slaves. He introduced that bill. 2 years prior to that, in the General Assembly, when he was a member, a bill passed allowing for, because this wasn't even legal, the manumission of slaves upon your death, which was not even legal. And by the way, when Caesar Rodney died in 1884,
he had a clause saying that he
manumitted his slaves.
Right.
And by the way,
why couldn't he have done that before he died?
Well, a couple of reasons, but the primary one was, and I'm not saying this.
It's wrong.
I'm not going to say this is right or wrong what he did. Right. I'm saying that what he did was unusual. The number of people who manumitted their slaves was very small.
I can only imagine.
And so here was a guy that, while he was alive, he's looking around. He's saying, if I free these people, where are they going to go, and who are they going to work for? Now, you can argue, they say, well, maybe they could go up to Boston or someplace like that.
Or they could have stayed on his plantation and he could have paid them. He couldn't have paid them?
Well, you could have tried, but you also could have had the situation where there were other landowners, right? The reason that the bill didn't pass to ban the importation of slavery is because there were people who were against it, right? So he was in the minority. And so he was trying, and again, at this point in time in the history of the globe, slavery was legal and used everywhere. So in one little place, little Delaware, little southeastern Pennsylvania, some Quakers start getting together and starting to say, you know, this is wrong. And they started to write things. They started to go to the General Assembly and members of it and saying, you know, maybe we ought to look at this. And one man stood up and said, yeah, let's start to break down that edifice of mistreating other humans. At a time when this was not, the Declaration of Independence was a decade off still. And by the way, he then participated in the First Continental Congress in 1774. And there were two committees of that Congress, and the committee he was on was the one writing the letter to King George saying, look, King, George, dude, we really like you. However, you know, the Parliament has done a couple of things we don't really like, and you should talk with those guys. And by the way, I think we're going to ban the importation of slaves. He was on the committee that wrote that in 1774. We didn't even have a Declaration of Independence yet.
But he still had the 200 slaves.
He did, absolutely. And do you know what would have happened at that point in time? In 1774 or 1770, if you just freed them, they would have been enslaved by somebody else.
But
so what would they have accomplished?
He didn't do that.
He didn't. You're right. And so fortunately, those people, didn't get taken by somebody else who would have perhaps mistreated them worse. I'm not arguing that slavery was a good thing. I'm arguing that slavery was. It was everywhere. Everywhere. And this man in this area, who was not a Quaker, was one of the first people to move and say, how do we start to unwind this thing? And he died before we even had a country. He died in 1784. The country didn't formalize until 1787 and 1789. He was dead 5 years before any of that. So he was at the point of the spear. Now, you can argue and say, he didn't do enough.
I will.
Okay, fine. Well, that's your opinion. Right. I think that if we sat down and looked at the times in our lives that we stood up against the crowd, against the 1,000, and said, I alone am right, I bet you that's a very small percentage of people that do that. And I bet you that you and I might, if we look back at our history, probably haven't found a lot of times where we were the ones standing up in front of the 1,000.
Yeah, I just don't want the viewers to think, from the description that you gave, that although at that point in time you make a very good point that if they were freed, what would they do? Where would they go? But I don't want you to think that they are sitting here living in the Hilton.
And by the way, agreed. Absolutely, slavery was horrible. And nobody's arguing that. But he was, if you want to point to where the abolition movement started, the abolition movement started in the Philadelphia area by the Quakers.
Correct.
And he was in Kent County, Delaware, at the external extent of the Philadelphia area. He was a farmer. He wasn't in Wilmington where they were shipping products up and down the East Coast. Mm-hmm. He was down there, farming. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he heard that message and adopted it and tried to do something when everybody, remember when Abraham Lincoln was elected president, Abraham Lincoln's first idea was a purchased emancipation. We'll take the federal government, we'll go to the slave states, and we'll buy their slaves, and we'll free them, and figure it out from there. And they said, let's do the test case. Let's go to Delaware, because the north part of Delaware, the Quaker part of it, the northern was kind of freedom-loving. Had slaves in Newcastle County, don't get me wrong, but it was more freedom-loving. And it was Kent and Sussex that had slaves. Let's go. And this is well after, this is 1860, right? And so they come to the Delaware General Assembly, and the Delaware General Assembly tells them to go pound sand. So he's in the state of Delaware that 80 years later told Abraham Lincoln to go pound sand. 80 years before that, he's the one saying we should not import slaves, we should allow the manumission of slavery, and by the way, I'm going to do it.
So what are we going to do? So let's fast forward several hundred years, and now we have a statue in Rodney Square, not too far from the studio here, and it's removed. My thing is, it's reminding, especially those that understand history, that know history in this community, which is predominantly black for the most part. Every day they're walking by and seeing this slave owner who did God knows what to...
The start of the abolition movement?
That did God knows what to his slaves. We don't know. Maybe we do. Maybe there is some documentation, but shows them...
We know he manumitted them.
Their value is nothing more than property.
Which was part of this country, which, by the way, was part of the world.
Doesn't make it better.
It puts it in context.
But you don't celebrate it.
No, but you
because
celebrate.
If you're celebrating that, then you should be celebrating
So we celebrate Juneteenth because that's the day slavery ended in the last place in the country, right? Mm-hmm. That is an important thing to celebrate. Why isn't it important?
Well, it can't
to
be.
Juneteenth
Juneteenth is no longer celebrated in government holidays because that was removed through executive order.
Well, whatever. I celebrate it because I think anytime you end slavery,
you just go for the barbecue.
Actually,
there's
good barbecue.
Yeah, it is.
But when we celebrate the Revolutionary War, we talk about Lexington and Concord. What's Lexington and Concord? The shot heard around the world. It was the original, that's where they made the fun. Caesar Rodney was the guy that shot the first effort around freeing the slaves, around abolition. He was unsuccessful. He had grown up in a place where everybody had slaves, and yet he looked around, he said, this is wrong, how can I start to whittle this away? And we should, I'm not saying that you don't say he owned slaves, because we ought to say that.
We have to say it, it's what happened. Now let me ask you, we're going back to this statue that people are identifying as a slave owner. They look up, they're on their way to work.
Why don't they identify him as the guy that started the discussion to end slavery?
Because they're identifying him as someone who owned over 200 slaves and enslaved people for a very long period of time and only promised them their freedom once upon his demise, which there was absolutely no guarantee of at that time.
Again, I would come back to you and I would say two things, which I've already said. One of it is, when have you stood up against the 1,000? And two is, what were they going to do? Because there was nowhere else for them to go. I mean, part of what led to the Civil War itself was the federal law that mandated you return escaped slaves.
So do you?
And that was 80 years later.
Do you anticipate the return of this statue?
We should return the statue.
Do you
and we should have we should have a full discourse on the plinth. We should have a full discourse of how slavery happened and how this started to end it, and the fact that he owned slaves. We should have the whole history.
So
What's wrong with history?
You cannot tell me that you are comfortable knowing the information and you have a wealth of knowledge in regards to information, that you feel good about Delawareans, especially those of color, walking by this statue and not feeling as though
I can't choose how you decide to feel.
Right. Neither
what
can I.
What I can tell you.
What I can choose is for a statue not to be there reminding me of oppression and slavery.
As opposed to reminding you of how an abolitionist leader started the movement that led to Juneteenth.
I understand that is one of the things that he's done, but just because, O.J. scored a lot of touchdowns, but he still killed the person.
Evidently he did not. He was found not guilty.
There's no statues in the middle of the park. And there's a reason for that.
Did O.J. attend either Continental Congress?
I don't even know why I got into this.
Did he attend either Continental Congress?
I mean, let me
just read this. In 1770,
I don't
wait one second.
the statue should return.
Wait 1 second. No, I understand that. In 1766, Rodney was named to the Supreme Court of the colony. He was at that same time a member of the General Assembly.
He's one of the boys.
No,
Rodney was doing the same thing.
He was continuously in the Assembly until 1776, sometimes holding the office of Speaker. In 1769, he tried unsuccessfully to have a law passed prohibiting the importation of slaves into Delaware.
I don't even think
he
it
was
should be
there
called
when the
Rodney
law
Square.
passed allowing for the manumission of slaves. He was in the Delaware General Assembly when he died in 1784. He was a brigadier general and later a major general in the Delaware militia. And the reason he was not in Philadelphia on July 2nd in 1776
is because working on his farm.
He was not. He was serving as the brigadier general in the militia, in the military, Delaware militia, putting down an uprising of Tories in Kent County. So he had to serve as a military leader to stop Tories from trying to stop the revolution which led to the freedom of slaves. And then he had to ride in the middle of the night on a horse with facial cancer up to Philadelphia to cast the vote.
It was a decision that he made on his own.
He did. And by the way, that ride cost him his life at young age because there was no health care for facial cancer in the United States. He could have gone to England. He could have screwed the whole thing and said, I'm going to go to England and just get my face taken care of and live a peaceful, longer life. He chose not to and wound up dying young. And by the way, had a lot of other stuff during the revolution. But this man was a leader at a time when the world needed leaders.
So to the 8-year-old that fictitiously, because the statue isn't coming back, but there's enough Caesar Rodney memorabilia all throughout the state. In every neighborhood that you go into, the neighborhood sign has Caesar Rodney at the top of it.
It does.
do you tell them, I can't tell that 8-year-old of color that was a good guy?
Have you ever done anything wrong?
Today?
In your life?
Within the hour, yes.
Yeah. Well, you know.
Are we at that point?
Well, I guess my point is, you're condemning him because of the time in which he was born, as opposed to recognizing the things he went through to try to change his times.
And again, I think we're going to disagree.
Well, that's fine.
I think we're going to disagree. I think that there's better choices of people that we can use.
And so let me know. What's your choice?
I will. And when I investigate, when they say, Kerwin, we're putting together a committee to see which statute
You could start it. Caesar Rodney started the getting rid of slavery. Why don't you start the movement to put some person on the plinth?
I will, and I can tell you this. My recommendation,
and you can stand against 1,000. The one
Mayor
man
Carney,
against
if you
1,000.
place me on this committee, it will not be Caesar Rodney.
Yeah, that's a shame that you don't value the efforts and the personal sacrifice that he went through to start the end of slavery in the United States
I
and
think
the globe.
Harriet Tubman would be a far better. I mean, we already have Tubman Park. Bring her up to
Why?
this
Why? I
large,
mean, we've got
beautiful
plenty of
venue.
places that we can name after people.
Don't worry, he'll still be on a neighborhood
There are
sign.
plenty of places you can name
you'll
after
still
people.
Feel as
He'll
though
still have his
you've-
statue at Statuary Hall in Congress.
For now. For now. Well, since you're bringing up federal, let's talk about your buddy Donnie Dynamite.
Sure.
And
What would you like to know about the president, the 47th president of the United States?
how happy were you when he was elected?
Well, so you and I talked before the election, and I honestly never considered myself necessarily a Trump-type person, but I thought he was.
Really?
But I viewed him as a better candidate than Kamala Harris.
We'll get back to that in a second. We're going to deal with now, even though he had 30, I can't just let it go. Even though he had 32 felony counts, even though he had several failures, and this is, I guess he needs a statue in the park too.
So what?
Wow. Thank you for your honesty.
Well, I mean, the voters
Thank you
said
for
the majority.
So what?
The majority of American voters looked at what you
They
just
did,
said,
and
they
they
said,
made their
and
decision.
They said
They made their
"So
decision,
what?"
and at the same time, when this whole thing goes kapoof, I want you to come back on and say, so what?
So I guess one of the things that I'd like to point out is imagine if the Democrats under Biden had gotten rid of the filibuster, what the Republicans under Trump would be doing right now. They could pack the court.
Absolutely. They're going to try to pack the court
No, they're
anyway.
not.
Oh, stop it. Yes,
will
they
not.
are. It is all part of their
They
agenda and
will
what they want to do.
not.
Absolutely.
That is something that the left wanted to do.
No.
That is something that
Look
the
at the
left.
Supreme Court
By the way,
now.
it's
Look at the
also-
Supreme Court now. You have a supermajority on the
9
Supreme Court.
members of the
You
court.
have a supermajority
Yeah,
on the
it wasn't
Supreme Court.
packed.
That's not packed. It's not because the other people haven't died yet.
And they will. And at that time, whoever's president will get to nominate somebody else.
Stop it.
I'm just telling you,
Stop
if you
it.
follow the rules that exist,
Tariffs.
the country runs
we're
really
going to talk
well.
about tariffs.
And by the way, Delaware is a participation. Delaware is a
can't
participant.
talk about tariffs because you
No, I'm
know,
not.
Charlie,
Oh, no,
you're
I
a
will.
numbers dude.
I can talk about tariffs. I can talk about-
You're a numbers dude for
But
Duke,
what
and
I
you
want,
know
but what I
that
want
is
to tell
not
you
a
is
good decision.
Delaware is a signatory to the national popular vote, which says that if enough states apply so that the electoral college is, that
Dismantled.
that every state that voted, their electors would have to vote for whoever won the national vote. Had the national popular vote been in place during this election, Delaware's 3 electors would not have voted for Kamala Harris. They would have voted for Donald J. Trump. National popular vote. It's on the books in the state of Delaware. And it was passed under your guys in the General Assembly. They're all Democrats by large majorities. There hasn't been a Republican governor since 1992. There hasn't been a Republican Senate since 1972.
Right.
There hasn't been a Republican House since 2006.
And we're better for it.
We are.
We're better for it.
Oh, sure. Our education, as we've talked about, it's so good when only 1 out of 3 kids is proficient So anyway.
There are some difficult numbers in regards to education that we
So anyway,
need to
I'm
work
glad
through.
to know that the Democrats in the state of Delaware think that Delaware should have voted for Donald J. Trump in the Electoral College.
It's always got to be some sneaky stuff with you. Just
They passed the bill. It's on the books.
Can we talk about tariffs?
Yes, well, let's talk about tariffs now. What do you like to know?
I know that as of right now, it's not a good idea.
So tariffs will raise costs, just like taxing corporations, right? If I tax a corporation, the company has to do one of two things: eat the cost, or they pass it on to their customers.
They're going to pass it on to their customers,
right?
And
that's what they're going to do with tariffs.
We saw how the market reacted to it. It was
absolutely,
it was,
no doubt about it. I agree with you.
I don't.
But how come both
Did you
Canada,
just say that you agreed with
Yeah,
me?
that it would raise costs if the tariffs are executed.
Right.
And what happened? Mexico and Canada said, hey, look,
We'll strike a deal with you.
We'll strike a deal with you. Colombia said, let's strike a deal with you. Because, so when I was in the General Assembly, I sat on a committee, the Sunset Committee, and we were reviewing an agency that gives away free money, the Council on Development Finance. Not one of Matt Meyer's favorite.
Please leave my governor out.
And in that conversation,
leave my governor out of
it turned out that Koch Industries had bought the fibers business from DuPont. Was
KOCH,
yeah.
excuse me.
And they were paid by the state of Delaware, by taxpayers, $14.7 million, because they went to the governor at the time and they said, hey, we're buying the fibers business from DuPont. I think we might move it to New Jersey. So they opened the checkbooks.
There was a little bit of incentive.
So it was what one would call extortion. So Trump uses tariffs as extortion to other countries. He turns to Mexico and says, your economy, the United States on a per capita basis is the wealthiest nation. There is no European nation today that has a higher per person GDP, per person earnings, than the worst economy in the state in the country. So Mississippi has a higher per capita GDP than any European nation, than Canada. So so Mexico turns around and looks at it and says, we'll all get hurt, but we'll get hurt worse.
Right.
And Canada looked at it and said, we'll all get hurt, but we'll get hurt worse. It'll be interesting to see what China does.
It will be interesting.
Now, but still, China makes on a per person basis half of what you make.
Absolutely.
So we are so much more wealthy.
It's not a place that I want to move to.
Not a place that I want to move to either.
Okay, quickly, in closing, all of these executive orders, what are your thoughts?
Congress should do their job. Biden issued all these executive orders too. Trump's issuing reverse ones.
But we weren't doing things in regard, Biden wasn't doing things that affected the rights, the overall rights of Americans.
So what right have you lost? What right have you lost?
The day isn't over. My CNN chime hasn't gone off.
You said he's signed all these executive orders, hundreds of them, thousands, whatever the number is. What rights do you not have?
I chose the wrong word.
Okay.
I apologize. I have seen a strong upward trend, a very strong upward trend to an idea that those, especially those of color, those that are not, that don't meet the Make America Great Again format, their lives are going to be difficult. They're going to change just a little bit.
And you know this, why?
Because I know
because
my
it's a
president.
political decision.
Because I
it's a
know
political
my
thought, not a market thought.
Because I know my president.
If the economy grows, and by reducing regulations and allowing companies to invest without the worry of having to fill out a bunch of paperwork for bureaucrats in Washington, wages go up. Just like in the first Trump term, the differential between wages by African Americans and Hispanics reduced to levels that were historic lows. And I suspect that'll happen again, because a growing economy, there are only 0.8 people looking for work for every job that is available today. So in other words, we don't have enough workers for the jobs that are available today. As that grows, as that differential grows, wages go up because businesses have to hire people.
Businesses,
you're
saying businesses have to hire people, but the people that they need to hire, you're ejecting from the country.
So you would like to take advantage of undocumented workers at the expense of the guy that lives down the street from you?
It's not the expense of the guy that lives down the street from you, because there's enough of those jobs right now where the guy that down the street from me could have that job too.
So Congress should do their job and let those people come in legally. This is simple.
I believe that, but I think that there's ways to go about it that doesn't turn over the apple cart.
I said,
and
Congress should do
what we're
its job.
constantly doing is cleaning up the mess of this president.
We're cleaning up the mess, the job that Congress did not do.
We are
Joe Biden
cleaning up
let
the
in tens of millions of people who are, and by the way, if you come in illegally, you're not allowed to have a job. That's the law, federal law. You are not allowed to have a job. So you bring in all these people legally, what the first thing you have to do? Put them on welfare.
Oh, stop it!
You do.
We're not going to do welfare.
That's why they rent hotels.
We're not going to do that. We're not.
It's
we're
the
not
law.
Going.
They
to
are
do
not
that.
allowed to have a job above board when they're illegal.
Right, but they're not sitting on welfare, and you have this idea of these people, the brown in color, sitting around in a hotel just juicing up the federal system. That's a poor depiction.
That is an opinion not founded on fact.
Agreed. Charlie, it's always good to have you on the show. I enjoy arguing
I do
with
too.
you. I really do. We need to do it again real soon.
I am always at your beck and call.
Let me tell you something. Your president will keep you coming back, because every week it seems to be something. It definitely seems to be something.
He is a disruptor.
He got that right. Donnie Dynamite. Thank you all for tuning in to this little different episode of The Agenda. Looking forward to your feedback and comments below. I'm sure that you'll have them. Thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next week right here on The Agenda.